Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Greg and Joe Turbo Show. As always, I'm your host, Joe, joined by I said illustrious last week. I didn't think of a word for this week. So my co-host, Greg, is
Co-host.
my co-host this
Yeah.
week.
Hi, everyone. Welcome
Hey,
back.
hey. This week, we're very lucky to be joined by Turbonomic's own product manager, Jeremy Hazlett. Hey, Jeremy, how are you?
Hey, Joe.
Awesome. Thanks for joining today. I know we've kind of had this one planned for a while. I know we're excited to chat with you about all things on premise. But maybe first we can start by getting a little information about who you are.
Yeah, sure. So I'm, as Joe said, a product manager here at Turbo, responsible for our on-prem integrations. So anything that happens inside the four walls of your data center, that falls underneath my purview. I came to the product management team after a little over 3 years on the professional services team, working alongside Greg and Joe, helping customers really get the most out of Turbo that they possibly could. And before that, I was a Turbo customer. So Greg and I have experience together in the past life where I convinced him to spend money on Turbo, and it changed the way we looked at our entire data center. And so, my progression through resource optimization and what this platform can provide really just led me to the place where I said, what can I do to impact a larger number of customers, a greater population? So that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Yeah, you've kind of like run the whole gamut from customer to post sales to product management. We'll have to get you in pre-sales soon, and then
I was just going to say, when you get into sales, Jeremy.
yeah, you will have completed the circle.
Okay. Well, I think so. I average about 3 years per, so I've got another 2 before I decide to make that move. But once I'm done with that, the sky's the limit, right?
Right. I mean, then it's CEO from there. Really, that's really the last step. That's
The
it.
last option, yeah.
Well, cool. Well, you mentioned, really focusing on sort of the on-premise data center, and obviously, we hear a lot today about the cloud and containers and sort of all these different infrastructures. But really, on-premise, while cloud is certainly getting more and more popular and becoming more and more ubiquitous, I mean, on-premise is really probably the strategy that still dominates in terms of how businesses are choosing to run their business today.
Yeah,
So
really the roots of Turbo, right? Where Turbo was born. We've added so much functionality over the years, but that's where it all started. VM Turbo, on-prem, ready to go.
yeah, that's true. I think we can still go on eBay and find some of that old VM Turbo swag. I think it's probably worth some money now. But hey, Jeremy, maybe you can kind of just give us like an overview, right? I mean, to Greg's point, we started out as a sort of an on-premise optimization platform and have since kind of grown into other areas like cloud and containers. But, maybe just kind of give us a sense of, where does Turbo fit kind of generally speaking in this on-premise optimization world? Like, what makes us different? What value do we bring?
Yeah, so the blanket answer is basically any on-prem environment, right? If you're running a hypervisor, VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, we're there to support. But if we talk about just the consumption of resources, right? When you have something, the goal is to run an application. What do you need to do that? Well, maybe it's a VM, maybe it's a container, maybe it's a function. But all of that requires some sort of hardware behind it. So the drive to cloud was a desire for that consumption model and the ease of use, right? That I could spin up something I wanted when I wanted it. I could play with it, I could try it, and I could shut it off. And so the difficulty, especially for teams that were really committed to running an on-prem environment, was how do I provide that level of service, that quality of service to my customers, right? And Greg and I saw this in our last company, that people would get frustrated that, hey, it takes me 10 minutes to go spin up a SQL server in Azure. Why can't I do that here in our on-prem dev environment? And we knew we could control the on-prem dev environment, and we could do it, arguably cheaper. So, there's the challenge with a lot of teams for infrastructure teams is providing that level of self-service and the experience that a client has, right? Our cloud providers, the public cloud providers, have done a great job of simplifying what it means to say, I need a database, I need a web server, I need an AI platform or a system with a GPU that can crunch this data set and give me some sort of guidance coming out of it, right? And so the cloud providers are they expanded so far beyond what most on-prem shops could do because they had more resources available, from just a technical expertise perspective. I think that
capacity and watch what I can do, right?
Exactly. And so what we've seen is there's a bit of a boomerang effect or rubber banding where people all of a sudden they deployed those cloud workloads, they deployed those AI, ML, instance types in Azure AWS, and then they got the bill. They said, wait a minute, right? I can't do that.
Unlimited capacity.
Right. So in 1 month, I spent what I could have spent by buying the hardware myself. And so the challenge then comes back to the infrastructure team saying, our business is operating at a deficit because you can't provide this. So we see just operationally that as companies and internal IT teams come up, answer that challenge and start giving those capabilities back, that people are more apt to come back on-prem. I'll get into this a little bit later, but our support for GPUs is a capability that is actively being developed, and it's something that is targeted specifically for those clients that have AI and ML type workloads or VDI and GPU acceleration workloads that you have to get as much out of the hardware as you possibly can. And so, when we look at where Turbo fits in the on-prem data center, to bring it back to your initial question, I know I went off on a tangent there. It's about making sure that you're not overspending or over-allocating, the resources, the operating outside the boundaries of the constraints that you have, right? And that's your physical hardware has limits, and when you're coming up to those, we help plan, but really we provide the actions to a client or to an environment, to those administrators, saying, this is the change you should make. Everybody's inundated with data, right? But what do you do with that? The analysis that Turbo provides and the decisions that come from that, and the analysis is tunable. I don't know how much the podcast has gone into that, but you can configure this. If you've got a lower priority environment, maybe you relax some of the standards that your environment has. Higher priority, tighten it up. Skew towards performance. Put in things like HA and DR constraints that say these systems have to be the same. I don't care if one of them is used 10% for 90% of the time. That 10% of the time I need to use it, it has to be the right size. Right? Those are the types of problems that we're able to solve, and that's the difference between Turbo and a lot of the competitors that we see is the decision.
Yeah.
Right. It's not about collecting information and reporting and showing it back to somebody. It's about making that decision, and then then integrating with a customer's operational process.
Yeah, that's one of the things we've touched on a lot, Jeremy, in the past 3 episodes that we've had is the different perspectives that you gain by looking at data, right? And it could be the same data set. Typically, it's not going to be the same data set, right? When you've got siloed into individual areas of an organization, more especially an IT shop, there's going to be different domains of knowledge with different key indicators that show those different domains, where things are, the health of what's happening. And those could be homegrown. They could be off the shelf. And all of those different perspectives might lead to different answers or different decisions. And that's one of the great things about Turbo is it takes all that data and it jams it all down to one automated decision. Whether you want to automate the execution or even execute that decision, that's later. But the decision comes out and everyone sees the same thing and can say, yes, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't, and here's why. And we can tweak it, like you said to your point, we could take that algorithm that comes to that decision and make it fit most any mold that's out there.
Right, because I mean, I've said this with customers that I've been on calls with too, and trying to kind of explain just this, just the situation is, your Turbo's job isn't to tell you what good is, right? You as the customer, as the consumer of our platform, have the power to essentially tell Turbo what good looks like. We're just the platform by which we can make that a reality, right? I mean, you work through Turbo to design and to sort of paint the picture of what you want your environment to look like. So we have knobs and levers, things that you can tweak, right, to higher priority environments, lower priority environments, different levels of automation at each one of these things. But it's also interesting too, Greg, because you mentioned this idea of these different silos, and it's something that I think we've talked about on other episodes as well. But I think sort of like bigger picture here, right? It's not always a technology problem, right, that we're fixing. In a lot of ways, I mean, we are a technology product, but we are fixing or addressing a human problem, right? Which is sort of this inability to communicate, this finger pointing exercises because my data says one thing and yours says another, and so who's right? And for us to be able to bring all these sets of data together, and as you said, give output one trustworthy action that accounts for everyone's different viewpoint, essentially, right? Because we're looking at databases, right? We're looking at the virtual machines, we're looking at everything, and we account for all of that before delivering an action. We can essentially eliminate that human problem, and hopefully that pushes this idea of optimization, or makes it easier, I guess, for people to adopt.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that you said in there was that Turbo's job isn't to tell you what good is. You have to tell Turbo. You have to give Turbo the constraints. You have to tell Turbo how your business operates. Sharpen up that pencil to a point where Turbo understands how your business or how your organization or how your IT shop operates, and then it will tell you what good looks like because you've told it what good ought to look like. But maybe I'll put this question to you, Jeremy, or even you, Joe. Whoever wants to answer it. But how out of the box, right? What's the approach that Turbo takes, or is it more middle of the road, more efficient, more performant? Like what's your take on that?
So
with respect to what good looks like, right? Like out of the box,
yeah.
Stop and let it go.
When it comes to the standards that Turbo defines, or the defaults that we have, right, they've been defined through years of industry study and guidance from hundreds of clients that say this is good. Right? This is what good looks like. Now you have certain applications in your infrastructure or in your company that require great. Right? Some of those might be your order processing system. It might be your large bank. It's the check processing or credit card processing, right? That those applications need to be skewed with almost reckless abandon towards performance, right? Any peak that I ever see, I never want to see my system hit that peak again, right? If I hit 100%, it means I've done something wrong. And in that case, you can customize Turbo in a way that treats those applications that way. So that's really where our standards and out-of-the-box configuration comes from. Joe, one thing that you said that I love talking to you because you tell me what good looks like. Not only are you're talking about defining the policies that happen within Turbo that say, give me these operational levels, these are my expectations of where I want you to set a reaction or set an action, but how good is the data that we're getting, right? If the only thing that we can operate with is data from your hypervisor, right, the physical hosts that are running tens or hundreds of virtual machines, I can't tell you how to tune the containers that might be running on that, or the individual services, whether that's, a web service, Apache or Tomcat or something like that, or into your SQL servers, right? The more data, and there's a longer, I think there's 60 targets that the Turbo can actually connect to directly right now and generate actions on. But the more of those targets that we add, and the higher up and down, the supply chain, where the application that a user is experiencing is at the very top, going all the way down to the physical hardware that application's consuming, the more complete we can make that picture, the more fine-tuned you can define what that experience should look like and what the expectations are of the application to the end user.
Yeah, that's a great point. And honestly, like with SQL, that's probably the one that I see the most sort of the next target, right? We'll target like a vCenter, and then they'll have a large SQL environment, and that'll be sort of the next thing we go after for exactly that reason, right? Is, without directly targeting SQL, right? We're just getting those SQL metrics from the hypervisor, and those are not necessarily complete, right? By
Right.
sort of ingesting those SQL metrics, we get things like cache hit rates and DB-mem, and that helps to inform our decisions, especially when it comes to things like scaling memory on that VM, right? Is it locked up by the database? Are we over provisioned? Can we scale back? And we can't reliably answer that question without the data coming directly from SQL. So it's a great point. But again, I think highlights the sort of the beauty of Turbo itself, in that, we are a platform that has these integrations, and just as anything else in the world, the better the data, the better the output in everything. And Turbo's no exception by any means, but we bridge that gap, right? It's not the DBs looking off in this dark room over here, looking at one tool set, and then your infrastructure guys over here looking at their vCenter dashboards. It's one place now that we've pulled these two teams together, these historically disparate teams, and we're able to give them.
I mean, you say two teams, I hear four teams, right?
Right.
You've got your DBAs, you've got your operating system teams, you've got your virtualization team, you have your storage team. Don't want to forget the network guys, but usually that's an environment that's pretty solid, right? And so, by powering these conversations or empowering these conversations, we're creating that connectivity between the teams that was typically a little bit more difficult to really stitch together. So, yeah, I totally agree, right? It's, as we add that information and we pull these teams together, we are improving any client or application's performance.
Right, and solving for that human problem as much as the technology problem, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about it a little bit without directly talking about it, but I think it's probably worth kind of double clicking on here, especially for folks who maybe aren't as familiar with Turbo. But this idea of Turbo delivering an action, and sort of when it delivers an action, right? And I think there's an important thing to highlight there, right? Because again, sort of traditional IT has worked off of this model of a threshold for as long as IT has existed.
Yeah.
And essentially every platform, every tool outside of Turbo follows this model, right? This approach of just send me an alert when something breaks, and then kind of let me go out and try to figure out how to fix it, and cross my fingers that whatever change I make doesn't have some ripple effect somewhere else in the stack, and then sort of around and around we go. And Turbo's approach is different. And I think, in talking with customers, that's typically sort of the first thing that we really try hard to get people to understand, right? Because that's sort of the foundation for everything that we do, in that we are not threshold based. Instead, we kind of have this concept of desired state. So maybe you can kind of talk to us a little bit about some of the nuances there and sort of why that's important.
Yeah, so desired state starts with, again, like you said, what does good look like? And so, if an application may spike 20%, right, and that's the most you ever expect it to spike, or to some maximum level of utilization, you're able to configure the utilization limits to say, if utilization goes over 70%, right, I'm getting really close to 100, at which point maybe I should resize. Maybe I should add a little bit more resources so that utilization doesn't hit 70% because I expect to spike sometimes, but I don't want to size to my peak of peaks because that may be something, you know, if for the Windows systems administrators that might be hearing this, a Windows update or a reboot, and all of a sudden you're flooding RAM consumption or CPU, right? That it's not as conservative in resource utilization. I've got it. Why not use it? And in reality, that's the same mentality that humans bring to work too. If I have this much, I'm going to try to use it. So Turbo aligns itself to that desired utilization level and desired state. As you said, that's kind of a Turbo specific goal, but if our goal, you know, for a desired state is you're hitting 70% utilization, it's because we're reserving that 30% beyond for spikes, right? For peaks, right? And the expectation is that your environment's going to use that. Over time, that can be adjusted and say, maybe I need to push a little bit higher or, you know, conversely, a little bit lower. Now, to make things a little bit less rigid, right, we also have the concept of diameter. You already went into Turbo talk, so I'm going to go ahead and keep diving in, which is basically your plus or minus factor. So with a diameter of 10 and a desired state, you know, of 70, your plus or minus is going to be utilization between 65 and 75 is our target, right? That's where we want our normal utilization to be. If we're there, the environment's running the way we expect it to. If you're running below that, you need to put more work on it, right? Or you need to resize it and make that smaller. So sometimes that is, I don't need as many VMs because, you know, my pool of application or web servers, you know, I've got 10 of them and I'm running at 50%. I don't need, you know, 10. The 5 doesn't work because that takes me out of my burst ability, but maybe 7, right? So let's suspend the 3 VMs. Take that to your physical infrastructure, right? And this is huge in environments that are really cyclical, right? A VDI environment, for example. During the day, you need 32, you know, nodes in a cluster because you've got that many consumers. At night, maybe you need 5, right? Shut them off. And that's the power that Turbo brings into a data center is we can shut that off or provide that information to you, and all of a sudden you realize, okay, at night, instead of running VDI there, I'm going to run some of these AI or ML jobs, these workloads on this hardware, right? If it's as simple as throwing another piece of, you know, graphics hardware in there, or, you know, one of the compute optimizer chips, throw it in there and use that hardware. Get the most out of it you can, right? The best thing that you can be doing is running your hardware hard because that means you're getting the money that you invested into it back out.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? I mean, because ultimately, too, like one of the benefits of Turbo, right, is I mean, I think we can all agree. We've all worked with customers. Probably the biggest issue we see isn't necessarily being under resourced. It's typically everyone's way over allocated, and then we talk with the customer and we say, so, you know, what's the plan for the next year? Oh, well, we have, you know, we're buying new hardware at the end of the year. Well, why are we buying new hardware at the end of the year? Well, we obviously don't have enough, you know, all of our
they're planning for plus 30% growth, right?
Right.
And that 30% number is real. But if I can, I'm taking over here for a second.
Oh,
A real world example, a highly containerized environment, right? That's the customer focus here. They provision their hardware, and then they decide how much they're going to over provision that for their Kubernetes environment. Okay. Now, clients or customers, internal customers, can request resources, and they receive namespace quotas that they can then deploy their application into. So everybody, okay, my quota is this big, I'm going to request that big. And then they deploy into it and the application starts running. And so inside the quota themselves, maybe they're running at 30%. right? And take that across the entire
Right.
board,
And
the whole piece of
that's gonna be
hardware.
carved out.
They're all running at 30%.
Right.
And let's say you went 2-to-1 on how you can over provision your hardware. They're not actually at 30%. The hardware itself is running somewhere between 10 and 20% utilization for CPU and memory, right? And so now you've overbought by at least 70%.
Yeah.
And so that's the problem that we can help solve. And that's the problem that our platform can help highlight for our customers, that you can start arguing, okay, we need to either over provision more, or have that conversation with the teams that own those namespaces and say they don't need to be as big. Right? You guys are barely using it, right? You're setting up these requests that all of your services are starting up with 3 CPUs and 10 gigs of RAM, and they're using a milli CPU and 10 megs of RAM, right? Just because you can use it doesn't mean you should, and that's the data that we provide.
Yeah,
and the actions that we provide.
And that 70% number might sound like hyperbole, it might sound like an outrageous thing, but that's the reality. I mean, that is not uncommon to see environments that are over provisioned, or overbought by that much. I mean, it's not uncommon, I would say.
I was a little conservative for the environment I'm talking about, but I wanted to give them credit. So go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say that Turbo is sort of sitting in the middle of the problem. We've got our on-prem engineers who are saying, or even stakeholders saying, I won't run out of money, but I could run out of resources. Whereas on the flip side, when we're going to play around the cloud, you can't run out of resources, but you might run out of money. And so you got to find that sort of middle ground where you can, manage the elasticity of the capacity you've got, rather than just setting it in stone, and sitting back on that money that you spent.
Yeah, what I expect to see on that front, you brought up a great point. Over the next few years, is FinOps became a thing, public cloud, right? How do I let people know what they're spending? How do I operate that? How do I actually make these changes happen when they realize they're overspending, and how do I optimize it, right? And those 3 legs, as we see that rubber band from public cloud back in on-prem, I expect us to see clients implement the same processes, right? That somebody, you've got these financial controls, you've got these reports talking about utilization, you've got the automation that's being built to serve the business needs, that all of these things are going to come into the on-prem environment. And if the folks running those environments aren't keen to it, it's going to be a little bit of a shock for them when they start hearing that, yeah, okay, you're running out of money now, right? They never heard that before.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's kind of a good topic of, where is that transformation going to happen? Where, if is that transformation going to happen? It's a difficult thing. One of the most difficult things that, in a previous role I had was figuring out that chargeback, right? How do I figure out how to tell a specific application team, this is how much resources he was using, and this is how much it's costing the company. And it makes it even more of a thick gray line, if you will, when multiple applications share that one server. I mean, you know that, Jim. We had application servers in our previous life that had 10, 11, 12 applications running on them. If you resize that server and you've got that shameback, showback, chargeback model in place, how do you represent that? Do you represent it in tenths of the total CPU, or a tenth of the cost of the total CPU? That doesn't necessarily make sense either, because some applications are going to use more CPU than others. So that is a very interesting and challenging problem for on-prem real estate. That how do I figure out how much it costs me to run these applications? How do I figure out who the applications belong to? How do I figure out how much I'm going to charge them back, or at least show them how much it's costing them to run these applications? And how do I do it in a consistent and fair manner?
Yep, for sure.
And then I guess so. Okay, so let's again. We've all kind of worked on the post-sale side, and then I think one of the our mission or our focus, if you will, was to drive this idea of a journey, right? And so specific to on-prem, I guess. Um, say a customer gets Turbo, and then they're new to the platform. Sort of, what are the steps for organizations to really unlock the benefits that Turbo has to offer, right? The ability to sort of right size and make good decisions and do right by everyone, not just your team or your application. What does that process typically look like, or at least what do we kind of like try to walk people through? And,
You're asking a product manager for this and not Greg?
you used to be a TAM as well. Listen, don't forget the little people.
I'm with you. So I think the starting point is there's two places, right? You can start with the ideal, right, which is we want to optimize and guarantee performance, and you get the executive buy-in, right? Because no big change happens in an organization without high enough level approval.
Yeah.
So sometimes you can sell that dream without a piece of data, right? You can just say, this is the right way to do things, and this is how I want to operate our environment. And you'll get, I was lucky enough to get somebody like Greg that said, yeah, do that, right? And I said, we can do it. Now, I took a little bit of the second approach as well in this, which is I ran a little bit of a trial, right? And I spent some time working with the platform and tweaking things and seeing what would my environment look like if I'd actually implemented Turbo. And by doing that, by taking a little bit of time to understand the platform and configuring a few things, right? The groups for my VDI servers versus my Gen Pop VMs versus the SQL servers that were, as a SQL shop, right? They were super high, importance. What do I actually need to accomplish, or what do I need to get the work done in this environment? And it turned out it was something like a 70 host reduction, right? I didn't need as many hosts. I needed to do some re-architecture, right? I need to redesign some clusters, but it wasn't hard once the data existed to have those conversations with the virtualization team that said, I don't know that we should do that, right? We've always kind of kept this environment and this environment and this environment separate. Yeah, but if you look at all of them running together, they don't need to be separate, right? There were physical barriers to logical problems. So that's kind of the starting point for bringing Turbo into an environment. From there, it's you find your friendlies, right? Find the teams that you have good relationships with, or best the stuff you own yourself, right? Dog food it or drink your own champagne, whichever one you want to use, right? Start there, right, and get that understanding of the types of actions that the platform is going to generate. And when you disagree, learn how to tune it so that you get to the point that you do agree. From there, you branch out. If you start with yourself, branch out to some of those friendly teams or lower priority applications, maybe something that's not customer facing, and just start getting those reps in, right? Start building that familiarity with an engagement with somebody other than your own team, or with folks where it's not just you and another application administrator talking. Now all of a sudden you have the product owner for that application in these conversations. You have the Scrum Master is mad because you want to take some resources away, and they want to escalate that up to an engineering manager. Okay, let's talk, right? Because this is where we want to advance our business to. And going back to phase one, if you start with executive support, you should always be comfortable saying, this is an initiative that we vetted, and if we need to escalate this, we can, right? And it's not an escalation as a threat. It's a maybe I don't understand the severity or the impact this is having, or maybe you're overestimating, right? So as you move up or down the hierarchy in an organization, right, the perspective of priorities changes. An application owner, their application is the world, right? That is, you know, that's the word of God coming down, right? But you know, if all their application does is print ABC on one piece of paper, you know, every second, maybe not. But those types of things, that's where to start. If you don't know where to start, if you don't have that engagement, you know, or that relationship, use metadata, right? You might be able to scrape some tags, right, and identify, you know, an environment. Let's just start with an environment and create a group based on environment tags. Where's the most value, right? And actually, that's not even where I would start. I would say, where is there a dev tag, right? Give me everything that's development. Okay, now let's investigate some of those changes that are super impactful. If it's go from 64 vCPUs down to 3, right? Whose is that, right? Do they have a history? Do they have a history of
that Shaneback idea, right? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. So if they have a history, you create a group, and all of a sudden they've got 10 VMs that are from 64 to 3. Hey, guy, we should probably talk about this. You know, there's a really good chance that you're causing CPU-ready issues in my on-prem environment. So you know, that level of analysis, it can be difficult to get to. That's where I'll give, you know, Greg and Joe, you guys a ton of credit, right? That's some of the value that the services teams can help provide, is digging into that data, discovering the opportunity, and helping create that presentation to the boss of that guy that's, you know, being pretty reckless with provisioning, and saying that this is why we need to make these changes, that this is the impact that you're having. If there's chargeback, maybe he'll care a little bit more, but in reality, right, it's the power of data to drive decisions. It can't be refuted, right? And that's, you know, when actions are generated in Turbo, it's because the data says it's the right thing to do.
One of the things you were talking about when you were building that story, you know, you can either have top-down executive support or bottom-up build support, you know, by gathering up references, gathering up wins, you know, potentially having some kind of a newsletter, right, to the entire organization or corporation saying, hey, look, this is what we're doing. We got this right-sizing initiative, and look at these 12 groups that really got after it and built these things up. You know, the thing that you were talking about in there was you're going to run into these people that are going to say no, and they're going to have dissenting opinions about what ought to be done. And I got to tell you, I love a dissenting opinion. I love getting to that no, because then you're going to talk, and you're going to have somebody, number one, that's paying attention, really vested, and has you know, some skin in the game, right? No, I'm not going to do that. Well, no, you're not going to do that. You know, you could start to have those conversations about, well, why is that? You know, well, my application is critical, and it brings in $4 billion of revenue for the corporation. I'm not touching it. It works fine the way it is. Leave it alone. Leave it over provision. And great, that may be the case, but you know, this $4 billion revenue that you're bringing in isn't just about one server. And by the way, look over here where you aren't at the right size, and you ought to be driving this up, right? You ought to be sizing this up, giving it more resources. Did you know about this? Oh, no, I didn't. We better have a conversation about that, right? And maybe they'll say no about that too, but at least we're getting to the point that we're sharpening that pencil, taking all of those dials and levers and switches and putting them into place where either Turbo is going to be a good fit for an application or it's not. And at least we've had the conversation to decide why it wouldn't be and exclude it. And then maybe come back to it later when Turbo might have an answer for whatever that problem was that didn't meet the application owner's needs.
Yeah, man.
I got to ask, have you run into an environment on-prem where you needed to resize up and the person you were talking to said no?
Yes.
I haven't, but I believe Greg when he says it.
I haven't either.
Yeah.
But I do too. Maybe you can cut this part out, but I got to figure out.
I'm leaving it all in, Jeremy.
Like
all of it's staying in.
All of it. F it. We're going.
The problem is I don't know how to edit videos, so this is all staying, by the way. So.
Was it? You should have started this with that. That would have been great. Was it an internal chargeback thing, Greg?
I'm sorry.
Was it an internal chargeback thing that they said no?
Yeah.
Or they just
Yes.
okay?
Yeah. Well,
Right.
I'll, to be more clear, it was all about licensing. If I size that thing up, I got to pay more licenses.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, 'cause I think-
So that's a topic that could actually maybe close this. Well, no, we don't close this up. We want to wrap this up with what's coming up next.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Joe, take it away. Cue that up.
No, yeah, I mean, appreciate that. Thank you. Just on a silver platter for me, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Are you sure you don't want to run this podcast?
Yeah. So on our last one, I didn't give our guest a heads up about this question, and I felt really bad. So this week I was better about that, and I warned Jeremy ahead of time. But it's a thing we like to do at the end of each episode, and it's kind of get our guests, opinion on sort of what they're most excited about coming up in Turbo, or a feature, whatever that might be in the roadmap, or something that's going to deliver value for our customers. So, what are you most excited about, Jeremy?
Yeah. So first, Turbo 893, we released the general availability for Power VM. So if you're running IBM Power Systems, we're now able to connect to the HMC host management controller, start drawing in the inventory data, the host specs, and metrics from that platform, and start creating or generating actions that help resize your LPARs, right? Your logical partitions. That is a feature that is going to continue in development through the rest of this year. And, if it, piques interest in this podcast, reach out to me directly, even please, jeremy.hazlett@ibm.com. This is something that is huge to me. The opportunity is massive for us to work with our power customers and help you get the most out of the most reliable and secure platform that IBM has to offer. Beyond Power VM, something that, my baby is GPU support. So in your x86 environments, in your vSphere environments, if you're running NVIDIA graphics, you understand the pain that comes with licensing those to begin with, right? It's a concurrent licensing basis, so you need active utilization on the card itself to drive utilization, but also sizing. So for your VDI type use cases, right, you want logged on users and powered on VMs consuming those resources or consuming the licenses. And you want to scale that to make sure that your user is having the best experience possible. So when they're driving up, the memory utilization on the virtual graphics card that they're consuming from, you may want to allocate more. Now, if you've got a generous allocation model to begin with, some people don't use their VDI at all. They log in, they pull up Slack, and that's how they spend their day. So maybe they need to scale down. It doesn't matter if they're using it or not. There's no such thing as over-provisioning or sharing of resources on a GPU. So getting that user to the right size is just as important as the impact that that a user who needs more is feeling. So right now, our capabilities, our integration for GPU is understanding where a VM can go and kind of solving the bin packing problem, more efficiently stacking the GPUs that are running across your clusters, right, and consolidating those VMs down to the fewest number of hosts and fewest number of cards. The scaling of GPUs is a Q3, more likely Q4 delivery date, but those actions will turn into, you shut this VM off, resize, turn it back on. That user's going to get the experience that the workload they're driving deserves.
So that's coming soon, sounds like. So that's exciting. So we'll have to have you back on then to discuss that, because I know that's been sort of something that's been on the
Absolutely.
roadmap for a while now with Turbo. So it's good to hear that that sounds like that's almost upon us. So
Yeah. Yeah. So right now, I think in 894, really, you'll have the basic inventory type data. So you'll start seeing in the entity information widget the installed GPUs on your hosts and the supported virtual GPU profiles that those installed GPUs support. So from that, we can start, making better placement decisions based on the profile that any given VM is running. You'll see that in the entity information for a VM as well. This is the vGPU profile that I'm running. So we understand that connection now, and that's what gives us the ability to solve that bin packing problem.
well, that sounds like an episode all to itself.
For sure. Yeah, it's exciting.
We will definitely have to bring you back if you'll come back, of course. I don't want to be presumptuous.
I'll fire up. I'll fire up a demo environment for you.
For the first one, so maybe it's fine. We'll be tentative. But
and even after a few weeks, I was still a few minutes late today.
no problem. But Jeremy, I know I definitely appreciate you making the time to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always great having a conversation with Jeremy.
Always good, and I'm glad that you're working on cool stuff. And we will definitely have you back on if you'll have us.
Come on now, I appreciate y'all.
Yeah.
Rob, as always, everybody, for more cool information about Turbo or IBM AI Ops, please check out the community page. Tons of great articles, videos, how-tos, and yeah, that'll do it for us today. And thanks for everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.